Bhagaji is then accepted back into the satsang and he talks to Shukanand Swami about all of the different things that he should do. He talks about the everlasting light and the knowledge of Brahm that he gives to Shukanand Swami. He gives him the Vachanamruti. He talks about how to maintain Atmabhuti. He talks about how to maintain Jnana and Vairagya. And he tells him that having deep affection for Bhagavath Swami is key in order to become Brahmarup. Jirdabhai then is on this massive search for the Satpurush where he goes and he worships Bhagavan and he even does penance on one leg in front of the Hari Krishna Maharaj Murti. And only then it does Hari Krishna Maharaj come to his dream and tell him that the true Satpurush is Bhagatji. Right? And so that is what Maharaj tells him, that the true Satpurush is Bhagatji, Pragji Bhakt, and so it's true, serve him relentlessly. And so he comes to this assembly in the next day and he finds Bhagaji discoursing to all these different devotees, and only when does Bhagaji notice him, does Girdhar Bhai get up, and then he goes to the front of the assembly, and then Bhagaji talks to him about the importance of worshiping God with proper devotion, and he explains the difference between ordinary worship versus true worship. Utari Bichar Bhagat and Bhagaji's company is for stitching of the waistcoat. And even when he asks him to make sure to take appropriate measurements, Bhagaji confidently replies that he has actually already taken the measurements just by looking at, and the waistcoat would fit perfectly. And so he also tells him that he also knows how to stitch a waistcoat for the soul and liberate his soul and to free his soul of all of these different types of sense pleasures and desires. Radha Bhagat forms a splinter group after he leaves the Junagadh Mandir, and he tells all these different people and individuals to stir away for Bhagatji, that he's doing wrong. But when he meets him, he actually elevates Guru Nanak Swami above Maharaj. Bhagatji corrects his belief. And then finally, their influence was removed from the devotees in Junagadh. Bhagaji gives all of these different discourses, all of these different beneficial advice and goodness to all of the different followers that he had, and he resolves the worries and doubts of all the different kotaris and devotees and strengthens their understanding of Upasana to help them become attached to the Satpurush. And Pavitran Swami and Anand is humiliated for maintaining the Narnara and Swaminarayan mantra. And this humiliation came 13 years after he himself played a role in Gunadhyana Swami's insult in Vartal. Then Bhagaji as well goes to Vaishnava Panchada 3 and then consoles him, and it talks about that ego is one of the worst things that we can do. He uses the analogy of frozen water versus liquid water when the Antakaran becomes totally divine through association with Gunadit. External circumstances cannot create internal ripples, and so he was able to convince and guide Pavitranand Swami on to the right path. Bhagavad discourses at various of these different festivals, and when questions arise about the avatars versus avatari, Bhagaji provides clarity and says that Shiji Maharaj is the avatari. He is the cause of all the avatars. And it clarifies that when Maharaj said that he was Sri Krishna, it was actually to make himself relatable to people who worship Sri Krishna at the time, but Maharaj himself was referring to himself as the source of all incarnation. Then he tells Vignandas to learn Sanskrit, and when Vignandas initially is very hesitant. He gives the analogy of a trained horse with overlooked defects that makes it unenjoyable to ride, illustrating that incomplete spiritual development affects both the individual and those around him. So to have complete spiritual development, must learn Sanskrit grammar. So that is what he does. He recollects divine experiences in Junagadh with Jaga Bhakt. He bonds with Jaga Bhakt, and Bhagaji explains how those who serve the Satpurush and perfected Ekantik Dharma always remember their service and divine experiences. And recalling these divine experiences, recalling them will prevent unhappiness. And so Chakubai then notices Bhagaji sitting at the back of the assembly. He says, how can I possibly sit my back towards Bhagaji? And so he brings him to the front of the assembly and explains to Acharya Maharaj that he's such an esteemed and delighted and enlightened individual, and we should learn from him. And this testimony increased Acharya Maharaj's appreciation for Bhagaji, leading him to always keep Bhagaji with him and ask him to do discourse. Bhagaji's power spread throughout Gujarat, Saurashtra, and Surat. He was a magnetic mountain. In his presence, people experienced what seemed like the manifest form of Naimisharanya Kshetra. Vrutris came to rest and focus with him, allowing them to experience the true bliss of Satchidanand Brahma. Bechar Bhagat is then relieved of his duties due to a conflict between Kothari Govardhan Bhai and Kothari Bechar Bhagat during a visit to Chapaya. Bechar Bhagat then returns to Valta, where devotees create even more conflict, and eventually he's dismissed from the mandir. And the shattered Kothari sought comfort with an Ayurvedic doctor in Chatur who had an affection for Bhagaji. And Kalidas Bhai had a prophetic dream of Bhagaji arriving in Kannada. He and the doctor traveled there, and they were amazed to actually see Bhagaji actually there. Then condemnation of ego. Bhagaji saw the dismissed Kothari Bechar Bhagat. He told them and advised humility, saying that even Uddhavji, despite understanding God's greatness, he yearned for the dust of the gopis' feet. He explained that humility is the key for us true son. The ego is one of the worst things, and those who have ego are like dogs. And even great sadhus acknowledge their fault of egotism, and so in this way he told Kothari Bechar Bhagat to go and ask forgiveness to Kothari Govardhan Bhai. Bhagaji attended the Murti Pratishtha ceremony in Surat. He stayed for 1 month and he spent most days sitting close, discording to other devotees. And he compared his father's teaching of 12,000 Sanskrit verses to his guru's Gunatit teachings of the Vachanamrita, suggesting that the Gunatit's teaching of the Vachanamrita would bring peace to the Antarkaran and supreme liberation. Shastri Yagnapurush Das then listens to these discourses, and he is attracted to these discourses. And when he thinks that how can he stitch and look at everyone and speak at the same time, Bhagaji understood his thoughts and revealed his thoughts to Yagnapurush Das Ji. And so Vignanda Swami then talks about Mool Akshar. He says that Gunatiyan Swami is Mool Akshar. This is one of the fundamental concepts that you need to understand. You must understand this fundamental concept. And so that is how Bhagaji Maharaj is able to convince Yagnapurush Das Ji through Vignanda Swami that Gunatiyan Swami is Akshar. And so Yagnapurush Das Ji becomes deeply drawn to Bhagaji and would attend his night discourse even to 2-3 a.m. And then he would wake up his Kali Ramratan Swami to share everything that he had learned. And when other sadhus actually critiqued Vignanda Swami for actually cleaning Bhagaji's board in their water tank, claiming contamination, Yagnapurush Das Ji supported Vignanda Swami and says that the gourd had been thoroughly rinsed first. And so this silenced all the critics as he was respected as Vignanda Swami's disciple, and the Mahant valued him highly. And so this incident showed Yagnapurush Das Ji's courage in supporting those connected to Bhagaji. And when Bhagaji heard of this support through Vignanda Swami, right, then he had immediately great respect and admiration and love and affection for Yagnapurush Das Ji. After the Surat festival, there were many of these prominent sadhus who left, who disregarded their status as renowned renunciants, and they became disciples of Bhagaji, showing that they had no ego. They had no pride of scholarship or reputation. They recognized Bhagaji as the true Satpurush and developed saintly qualities and virtues only through their spiritual association with him. In Kannada, Bhagaji's spiritual at the Vartal Jaitri festival, Bhagaji's spiritual powers were evident. He knew people's inner thoughts and he revealed to them. He drew the minds of 500 different assembly members onto himself. He discoursed about Brahma. He discoursed about how to have Ekantik Dharma. He discoursed about how to cultivate inner peace. And only when he was able to do this were people attracted to him. Were people attracted to his presence. And even once these saints asked him that, why does he only keep Yagnapurush Das Ji with him? Why does he only keep him in private when giving these discourse? And he says that he is like a beloved son to me. Bhagaji's group of sadhus tours Gujarat with strict discipline, and they are known as the Dhyan Mandal, which refers to as the meditative group. They talk about Bhagaji everywhere they go. They declare him to be the current holder of Ekantik Dharma. They declare him to be the Pragat form of the Satpurush on earth, through whom Bhagavan Swaminarayan eternally will manifest on earth. And they spread his glory. And because of this, Jahe Very Lal Bhai of Nadia developed such firm conviction that he wants to see, and he requests Acharya Maharaj to call Bhagaji there. But however, Acharya Maharaj decides to invite Bhagaji to the Jal Jilni festival in Gadada instead, and he also invites Jair Bilal Bhai. And so in Gadada, we have the Jal Jilni festival, and there were monsoon puddles, there were ditches, and all these different sadhus had to overcome these obstacles, the harsh weather, the ditches, and the obstacles that were in place. And he spoke extensively in the morning assembly about this. And then at Lakshmiwadi, he had the darshan of all the different places that were sanctified by Sriji Maharaj, and met with Hariswarup Swami and requested him to speak about peace. He used the metaphor of building a pinnacle mandir with proper construction. The Maharaj is the Chintamani, the Satpurush is the Parasmani, and once conviction in both forms are firmly established, only then is spiritual perfection developed. Then there's a revolt in Daban due to Balram Das issue that is escalated. He forms a splinter group in Daban. He convinces many of the devotees to support him and cause causes payments from Nadiad and surrounding villages to stop flowing to Vartat. And so the frustrated Kothari then urgently goes to Bhagaji and asks him for help, knowing that only he can actually calm the situation. And so Bhagaji then arrives to Vartat. There is a festive atmosphere that is created due to his presence, but the jealous sadhus still create obstacles for him, and he's forced to return to Moa before resolving the issue. And so he knew that next time when he does go to Nadia, he is going to have to use his divine powers. When Ramaratan Swami complained about his faded footprints of Bhagwan Swami and asked Bhagaji to exchange them with Yagnapurush Dasi's better pair, Bhagaji said, okay, we will do this. But when the exchange moment came, Ramaratan Swami agreed, led him to ask him for both sets of footprints instead of just a simple exchange. But Yagnapurush Swami, noticing Bhagaji's sadness and eager to please his guru in any way, he immediately gave up his footprints to satisfy Ramaratan Swami's demand. And when Acharya Maharaj heard about this and scolded Bhagaji for not understanding satsang workings, Bhagaji boldly replied that he will give Yagnapurush Dashi Shri Maharaj, who is the maker of the footprints. So it doesn't matter that he gave both pairs of footprints up, that he commands to Yagnapurush Dashi to learn 12,000 verses of Sanskrit. He reveals to Acharya Maharaj that this sadhu was miraculous. He would draw everyone into satsang all if he studied. And so he requested the Acharya to teach 12,000 verses of Sanskrit grammar, while Bhagaji would teach him Brahmvidya. And so Vighnandas also requested Bhagaji to speak to both Keshav Prasad and Yagnapurush Dashi about attaching themselves to the Satpurush. And so when he actually first questioned Yagnapurush Dashi about his studies, and he had learned that he finished the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad, and so Bhagaji expressed his wish for the young sadhu to study Sanskrit grammar. Dashi Bhai Bharo traveled to Vartal to find Bhagaji, and so Yagnapurush Dashi gave him sanctifying jasmine garden and gourd to present to Bhagaji on his behalf. And so when Dashi Bhai was traveling to all these different villages, he finally found Bhagaji in Jhansi, and he delivered the gifts as instructed. And Bhagaji was so pleased, and he said, and he exclaimed, "Blessed be your soul, Yagnapurush Dashi." Three times. This expresses extreme deep appreciation and gratitude for the young sadhu's thoughtful gesture and the gift that he had given him. And so that night, Dashi Bhai Bharo saw Bhagaji prostrating to sleeping devotees around 2 a.m. And when he tried to stop him, he said that that those who make such efforts to meet him deserve appreciation. The Maharaj said to place the dust of such devotees' feet upon one hand. So this incident reveals Bhagaji's humility. This reveals Yagnapurush Dashi's appreciation and genuine compassion and genuine love for Bhagaji, and Bhagaji's approval of this love. Then Bhagaji is invited to speak at a packed assembly in Varta, where he delivers a profound discourse on Vajrayana Sarankuta, and he explains that one can attain perfection in Ekantik Dharma only through becoming Brahmarupa and association with the Satpurus. He uses the analogy of making yogurt and ghee to explain how one cultivates the belief that God resides in the Atma. And so he also explains the qualities of an Ekantik devotee, that such a person is above bodily influences, has detachment, and treats even minor transgressions of God's command as major sins. Then he finally goes to Nadia to address devotees who had stopped paying the payments to Bharata due to the Balaram Das issue. And upon arrival, he just said that he would only eat their prepared food if they resumed offering these payments to Bharata. And so his approach worked. And the devotees brought 3 years of overdue payments, which pleased the authorities at Bhartal. He then reveals his powers in Nadiyat by drawing and reading people's minds and revealing their hidden sins and giving atonements. And they were amazed. And one notable instance was when Dahabai Bhatt, to whom Bhagaji whispered all of his sins, leading him to recognize him as the Satpurus. His daily routine was impeccable. It was all consistent with that of a true Satpurush. He would do discourses, he would do morning puja, he would do bathe at the well, even at that age, even in those circumstances. Then when he was walking back from dinner, he witnessed Gokul Bharat rudely shouting at a woman from her lower community to move away. And Bhagaji told her, that is God not in her heart as well? And he explains that true saintliness means not suppressing any beings and having good feelings towards everyone. And so that just through this interaction, Gokul Bharat gave up his inherent prejudices and resolved to behave in ways that would please the Satpurush. Bhagaji then delivered his discourse on Vajramul Garada 12. Then Bhagaji also explains that Upasana, one can only know when Upasana has been perfected when one experiences God bliss in one's heart, becomes Brahmrup through following God's commands. And he illustrates 4 essential practices: being happy through God's bliss, eradicating materialistic instincts, attaching jiva to the Satpurush, maintaining fraternity and respect with other devotees. Maya Titanand Brahmachari visited, and he observes that other devotees are following Bhagaji every single where he goes, and he compares his behavior to that of the gopis when they followed Krishna Bhagavan everywhere they went, and they were so mesmerized of Bhagaji that they forgot about eating, drinking, sleeping. They were walking backwards, even having their turbans backwards because they were so attracted to Bhagaji. And he explains that everyone is attracted to one who sustains Maharaj's murti, comparing himself to a magnet that draws these minds together. But there were some jealous sadhus. They feared Bhagaji's growing influence would diminish their own importance, and so they made a plot for him to go out in Nadia. And so Bhagaji used a poetic verse to illustrate these happenings. He says that just as the sun's duty is to destroy darkness, regardless of the moon and stars' presence, the Ekantic Sattva divine light naturally dispels spiritual darkness. So even though they are forcing him to go away, his presence and his divine light will naturally dispel the darkness that is created. Then in Pitlad, he stays at Rav Sahib's house and continues these discourses. And when he was questioned about being possessed by Swaminarayan, he explained this state using examples from the Bhagavad, comparing it to how the gopis became one and possessed by Krishna Bhagavan. And so Bhagaji explained that God only possesses devotees who have overwhelming love and total surrender. He cites these scriptural references as evidence. At a lawyer, Prabhu Das how Bhagaji gives, again, great discourses about Loyata and explains how two types of spiritual knowledge lead to bliss. One, how advanced devotees transcend attraction to worldly pleasures by either recognizing their harmful nature or by realizing their true identity as the Atma. He then emphasizes the highest spiritual state involves seeing only Purushottam's form everywhere. And he concludes that pure knowledge transcends Maya and can only be attained through the grace of a son and through associating with him through thought, word, and deed. When Ram Sahib's Muslim chief officer visits Bhagaji with the Quran, he experiences profound peace upon just seeing him. And then he demonstrates his universal understanding by explaining the four types of spiritual persons described in the Islamic tradition, not even the Hindu tradition, in the Islamic tradition, the Shariat, Tariqat, Haqiqat, and Marifat. And then the chief officer realizes Bhagaji's knowledge and declared him to be a true Marifat Purush, the highest even in the Islamic tradition. And this interfaith dialogue showcases Bhagaji's ability to connect with seekers from all religious background. So this Muslim chief officer, tells the visiting sadhus to remain with Bhagaji regardless of how they even treated him. And so Bhagaji then playfully teases the sadhus' devotion by ultimately expressing pleasure, displeasure with them. And through this interaction, Bhagavan Swami and other sadhus begin to perceive extraordinary divinity in Bhagaji, and they use this opportunity to cherish this form in their hearts. Bhagaji initially scolds the sadhus for following him, and they responded with deep devotion. They compared themselves to the gopis who couldn't resist Krishna Bhagavan's call. They expressed that preventing them from staying would cause their life breath to leave their bodies, as they simply couldn't leave or live without his darshan. And so Bhagaji was moved by his words. And so Bhagaji then also reveals one of the miraculous divine powers that he shows, as he reveals Rav Sahib's thoughts and mind reading thoughts that to tell the sadhus to dye their new clothes. And that is exactly what Rav Sahib had been planning to suggest. And when he had heard that Bhagaji had voiced his exact thoughts, he nearly dropped the bowl of sandalwood paste in amazement. And so this displayment of powers showed everyone about the extraordinary divinity that Bhagaji had. Then we have these sadhus that rebuke Bhagaji. And the Kochari rebuked Bhagaji for actually increasing problems rather than solving them. They said that the devotees everywhere now requested only him instead of other sadhus. Senior sadhus like Govind Swami complained that Bhagaji's disciple elevating him to unprecedented status. This led to other sadhus not being fed alms and not given proper food and respect. And so Bhagaji is now being worshipped everywhere. The complaints are intensifying that he is actually worshipped like God now. He is from the trees to the shrubs to the bush everywhere. Bhagaji's name is being spread. And so Kunja Vihari Das Shastri even accuses Bhagaji's disciples of acting like scorpions, first impressing them with bhajas and meditation, and then stinging them with talks of Bhagaji's glory. And these allegations meant that the disciples had stopped devotees from feeding regular and other saints by teaching them to distinguish between true and false saints. And so despite being considered an opponent, Shastri Balaram Das then invites Bhagaji to discourse before his departure, and he speaks intensely about the Vachanamrita, about the greatness of God and the Sant and overcoming all these different faults. Now only Gunadhyana Swami represents true Mula Akshar Brahman, and how one can attain a saintliness through him through his association. And then he explains when the sadhus returned from seeking forgiveness, Bhagaji greeted them by singing a bhajan about the impossibility of spending day or night without God. And he connects this to Karya 11 about how the gopis weren't able to leave Krishan Bhagwan, but they had so much affection, but that they knew that their wish, Motilal Pij has these postcards that are sent across various different villages, 64, that recognize Bhagaji's true spiritual status. And he warns others not to criticize him. And this is only happens when, after a month of sincere effort, he achieves a completely different level of happiness. And Bhagwan Swaminarayan appears in his dream, declaring to him that Bhagaji is the true manifest form of the Satpurush and true Ekantik devotee. And this only occurred when Motilal Pij, after spiritually initially associating with him, wanted to test with whether continuous devotion to God was possible if Bhagaji was truly the Satpurush. And so within a month of sincere efforts, because Bhagaji guided him and associated with him, he achieved a completely different level of understanding and happiness. And that is only when Bhagavan Swami actually appeared to his dreams. And because of these 64 postcards, they used these as evidence to orchestrate the excommunication of 12 sadhus from Bhagaji's group, including prominent figures like Vighnananda Swami and Yagnapurush Das. They took advantage of the Kothari's absence for eye surgery, and they threatened to close the kitchen unless Acharya Maharaj expelled these sadhus immediately. So the assembly on November 14, 1888, resulted in the mass excommunication, forcing these sadhus to leave Bartal that very day. And this marked the very fulfillment of Bhagaji's early prophecy that his disciples would have to face great unhappiness and needed to remain humble and be patient.